All right, welcome everybody. Today's guest is LJ Harries, and she's here to talk about EQ, something that I think salespeople could learn a lot about, and it would really help them, and hopefully help them focus on their language, right, LJ?
Absolutely right. Language and EQ is so important because sales is a people business and we communicate with our language, and emotional intelligence is all about understanding each other.
Yeah, awesome, and so important in sales. But let's kick off with a sales horror story, as we always do. So over to you to tell us about a sale gone wrong.
Definitely, this is more of a pitch gone wrong. And, when you get it so wrong at your first sort of contact point, then of course the rest is going to fall behind. And it wasn't more of a bang, it was more of a whimper. And I think it's a story that a lot of people can resonate with. It really came down to me not being prepared. And it was a big pitch. I had, 15 very high level C-suites in the room, and I only had 1 hour, and I spent the first 25 minutes just trying to find the file because I didn't save it from the server. So naturally, being in a super secured building, I couldn't access that. Finally, after running around, on your phone and trying to maintain small talk, there's only so much you can do with people whose time is very valuable. And I ended up with just a PDF, so I had no presenter notes. And not only was it a really great lesson in being prepared, but also thinking on my feet. And now I am never not prepared, with about 3 or 4 different backups. And I think there's always that slight technical difficulty, which is why I'll always show up 15 minutes, always book out a room 15 minutes early to go and do a bit of a dry run, because there's nothing more embarrassing. And people might not remember everything I said, but they'll remember how I made them feel. And if I made them feel like I wasted their time, that's what's going to resonate with them and stick with them from our relationship moving forward. So be prepared and don't keep everything on servers. Always have a backup on your desktop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great point. I mean, we've all been there, right? You make that mistake, and hopefully you make it once and you learn from it. So yeah, absolutely. I can absolutely sympathize with that one. That's a good story.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's start talking about EQ. So I know you sort of talk about the 5 key competencies.
Yeah.
Where do we start? So, if you're a salesperson and you don't know much about EQ, you're listening to this webinar and you're thinking, where do you start?
Where do you start? Well, a lot of people don't know what the Q stands for. Everyone's heard of EQ, or emotional intelligence. The Q stands for quotient, so it's a measure of that intelligence. Now, I see EQ very differently. I think we've actually stitched ourselves up by referring to EQ as a soft skill because it's the hardest to measure. Metrics are quite simple. Being able to, empathize and communicate and have small talk, have social skills are all part of emotional intelligence. Now, business in general is a people business, sales especially, because people buy from one-on-one, right? They buy from individuals less so than they buy from companies. And I think we forget that. And I think, legacy sales has led us down this path where it's more hard metrics opposed to soft skills. So coming back to the 5 key competencies, they are motivation. So how to trigger it in yourself and others. Sales is about driving action. How do you motivate yourself and others to do that? Empathy, understanding your buyer. We always, something I see quite a lot is people talking about themselves. Sales isn't actually about the salesperson, it's about the buyer. Empathy is a great way for you to define those needs and talk to them, to the buyer's needs. Then there's communication, something I'm very, very passionate about. My ethos is better business conversations. An idea is nothing if it's not articulated well, and there's some science behind that. And then there's self-awareness and self-regulation. So being really clear on what the objective view of you is, and then being able to optimize that based on the individuals that you talk to. Now, I truly believe that those 5 key competencies, motivation, empathy, communication, self-awareness, and self-regulation, that to me is a job description of a salesperson. So it's really important that people know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so motivation is an interesting one. How does motivation really sort of play into EQ?
Look, I think motivation is really misunderstood. Motivation is sort of seen as this external factor, like, oh, I'm not motivated. I'm going to wait for this wave of magic to take over and sort of grasp me and make me roll. Motivation is actually momentum. right? So that old adage, the best way to get going is getting started, is really, really important. And you can actually tap into that by just setting yourself time block and just get going. You'll find that you will start to get motivated as you get going. It's a barrier of mindset to sit and wait for it, because motivation's an emotion, which means it's internal. So you have to be able to trigger that internally.
Okay, interesting. So it's really about just recognizing that it's a key thing you have to do. You have to move forward and don't sort of sit around waiting to feel ready. Just do it. Is that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, sales specifically is a job where more often than not, the proactive activity is going to be your most high value activity, like prospecting.
Mm-hmm.
It's never the easiest thing to do. Being reactive is the most easiest thing to do. So to be able to trigger the motivation to do more of the sort of the slog part of the role is really important, because you have to stay motivated to do it. Sales is self-serving. It's, you have to drive yourself. It's self-starting. You can't just do what comes on your plate, because you'll never get ahead.
And do you have any thoughts that, well, one of the things that I see a lot in sales is, and you talk about that outbound, that prospecting, that really high value activities. And I see a lot of people, they fall into this trap of spending too much time planning for it, which seems to me like a stalling mechanism, because they don't really want to make the call, do the hard yards. Do you have any thoughts about how to, get across that sort of barrier?
First and foremost, you just got to do it. You've got to feel the fear and do it anyway. I think it's interesting that you said that there's too much planning. I see little to no planning, right? So people may have planned the time, but they've got 3 hours on a Tuesday morning. They don't know what to do with it, right? So they haven't really planned it into an action plan. They've just planned execution time. So there's no real understanding of who they're targeting, where they're at, what their insights are going to be, that they're leading that conversation. They're like, okay, I've got time in my diary. Now what? In terms of pushing yourself to do it, you just got to, there's no other way, but I just say, feel the fear and do it anyway. At the end of the day, it's not really about you. We get caught up in this mindset of, oh, what if it's the wrong time? There's nothing you can do about it. It's part and parcel. And once you start getting the wins, you start getting that dopamine hit, and suddenly you're incredibly motivated, and you're driving that momentum that will keep you going. So plan granular in advance, and know exactly what you have to do in your prospecting time. 3 steps. Okay, I know I'm targeting this vertical, or I'm using this channel. I'm going to drive these insights. Once you have the more granular foundation, the activity is a lot easier.
Yeah, good tips. And I love that, feel the fear. I embrace that myself. Like, I think if you're going to do it, just rip in, get started, progress, not perfection, right? I think that's really, really critical.
Absolutely. I love that. And I hero what's called the 70% rule. I had to be okay with things at 70%, because one, perfection's a fallacy. And, it's more valuable in sales, where there's a high volume of tasks, to get things done than there is to get things perfect. And we don't know what's on the other end of that phone or that connection, right? It's better for us to optimize that last 30% in partnership with a buyer or a customer or a prospective buyer than it is to overthink it and try to get it right at all times. Because what do we know? It's more valuable to be productive, right? High churn of activity, high volume is going to drive more outcomes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really like that. That's a great approach. And I feel I'd never sort of codified how I do it, but I totally agree. 100%, right? Love it. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about empathy. So obviously empathy is, let's talk maybe a lot about empathy. It's obviously a huge part of this, right? But how does empathy help salespeople, and how do you explain it to a salesperson who's sort of, not really sure exactly how empathy fits into the sales process? What do they need to do? Where do they start?
All right, I'm going to do a super simple exercise first. So I'll do it with you. I'm going to get you to put your forefinger on your forehead like this. And I want you to draw a capital E for me. Awesome. Now I want you to take note of what direction that E was facing. Was it facing so that I could read it, or was it facing so that you could read it?
Yeah, I think it was facing so I could read it.
Right. So what does that immediately tell you?
Yeah, I'm thinking about myself, not thinking about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust is born when we put self-interest aside. And it sounds almost counterintuitive as a salesperson. It's not about us at all. It's not about the mindset of the salesperson. It's about the mindset of the buyer, the needs of the buyer. I can't tell you how many times I've seen, initial meetings where the salesperson is just talking about their product. And at the end of the day, people don't care about your product. It's a hard truth. They care about the problems that they have. And if you can solve those problems, that's your entryway into that conversation. So that little trick here just goes to articulate relevance. If you see the world and you're offering everything from a buyer's perspective, it allows you to have a real clear understanding of their needs. And in sales, particularly B2B sales, our businesses are born to solve problems and to solve needs. And we don't do that by talking about ourselves. No one wants to be at a party with someone just raving about themselves. They want to be with someone who asks questions and seeks to understand. And that's really the basis of what empathy is. The most simplest way to practice empathy is to ask and not tell.
Yeah, interesting. And so, I mean, you're 100% correct that a lot of salespeople spend too much time telling and not enough time asking. How do they make that transition? So how they, it's one thing to say, ask more questions. It's potentially another thing to put into practice. I mean, if you're coaching someone, how do you help them make that transition?
First of all, it comes back to planning. Don't go and learn your offering back to front and have no read on the client. We have more information at our fingertips than ever before. It doesn't take more than half an hour to do some desktop research and then think, what are really meaningful questions? And what is the information I'm seeking off the back of these questions that's going to allow me to align my offering off the back of it? Right. And that's really all sales is. It's asking the right questions and that uncover the right information that allows you to position your offering off the back of it in its most simple form, of course.
Yeah, awesome. And I suppose I heard that answer as preparation. Do your homework, do your planning, be organized, and no doubt feel a lot more confident and calm when you're in the meeting.
And that's a really key point as well, because the moment you lack confidence, that transpires. People can feel that. No one wants to be with someone that doesn't really believe it. When you're confident and you believe in what you're selling, the passion and the energy is something that buyers really, really pick up on. And I see that a lot. And people, what's really important to understand as a rep is that people will buy from you when they feel like they are understood, not when they understand you. They want someone to feel that they get their business and their business problems, to have faith that they can deliver a solution against it. So I always come back to that. People will buy and engage when they feel that you understand them, not when they feel they understand you. So lead with the buyer in mind, right? Uncover that information. The conversation will naturally evolve into the solution that you can offer.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's a really great way to frame it. Absolutely right. Like the job as a salesperson is to get them to trust you, not for you to talk about what you're trying to sell. Like a really great framing. Let's talk a little bit about communication. So, you're in there, you're organized, you're motivated, you've done your homework, you've got good questions. How does the language you use play into this? Because I know this is a real sort of key area of yours, and we've talked about your love of language before, which I think we both share. So how does a salesperson use that to sort of, further optimize their outcomes?
Being clear and being succinct is really important. I think we tend to overcomplicate business, and our brains actually prioritize melodic, simple, concise, and communication with clarity. And it's actually why advertising works. There's a cognitive bias we had called the fluency heuristic, which means the more simple a message is, the more well articulated a message is, the more likely it is to be prioritized over other information and therefore retained and recalled. It's why motivational quotes, people are obsessed with them, because so rarely do we hear good points well made. If you're a salesperson and you can communicate clearly, succinctly, and obviously with credibility, your message will stick. And that's really important because, we both work in a tech space. It can be incredibly complex sometimes. If you can't communicate a complex idea very, very simply, it gets lost. And people are like, if this guy can't, communicate what he can do, how's he ever going to be able to do it? So being able to really clearly articulate, as well as have proof points, being able to talk to your customer's experience or case studies in a way that's very, very simple to understand is what's going to get you there. Conversational tone as well in our writing. I think we tend to overcomplicate, all those buzzwords. Again, simple messaging, our brains will retain it more is the best way to get cut through. It sounds counterintuitive in a B2B landscape, but it's not.
Yeah, great. And I think you're absolutely right. We do tend to absolutely overcomplicate in business, and there's this desire to almost fill the space with words rather than be nice and concise. What do you think about one of the things that I always thought about when I was pitching as a BDM was I always thought when I'm pitching to somebody, I'm really giving them the tools to go and sell to the rest of the organization. So they I need to embed in their mind the key items so then they can take it to the rest of the business. And I had this concept, and I've never tested it. I don't know if it's real, but I had this idea that I'd have 3 key points and I'd repeat them 3 times, and that usually seemed to stick. So, short, punchy items, make sure I repeat them across the meeting, and it seemed to stick.
Yeah.
Any science or just something I've made up?
No, absolutely. Repetition helps us remember things. It's why pop songs work. It aids recall as well. And I'm a big believer that tell someone 10 things and they won't remember 1. Tell someone 1 or 3 things over and over, and that's all they'll remember. And again, particularly with pitching, I came from media where it was back-to-back pitches for tenders. So you're sometimes 1 of 10, right? People walk away just, their mind's muddled. You want them to almost just walk away with 1 key outtake, and that's where you can get creative with messaging. Rhyme is a really good way of making sure that messages are retained as well. Make it simple, make it melodic, and again, repeat it. You only want them to remember 1 thing, and that's where we can help you. Anything out of that can come, in the lead out meetings.
Yeah, right. So I've got to get my rhyming game on, right? That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's called rhyme as reason. It's another cognitive bias. I use a lot of behavioural science in what I do. Again, a Mars a day helps you work, rest, and play. It because that message is easy to remember and retain, it actually means it's prioritized and believed more. You'll remember in the O.J. Simpson trial, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. That's a really great example where it's been used as a tactic in a real life scenario. Fascinating stuff. And again, why advertising works. And it's important to understand why advertising works, because that leverages all the science behind how to sell and how to sell en masse. So if you can kind of see advertising a little differently now, you'll start to pick up the levers that they've used to influence purchase. And as a salesperson, that's all we're doing. We're just doing it one-on-one.
Yeah, absolutely. So we really should be taking a lot of cues from advertising, thinking about, I suppose, those things that stick in our brain, and thinking about how can we stick things in our customers' brains in the nicest way.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
In the nicest, and that's what it is. It's not underhanded, but understanding, if you've got a good product and you're credible with it and you work with integrity, finding a way to make sure that sticks is really important. And we're bombarded with messages. And as a salesperson, you're really not up against competition. You're up against how clear you can be, how well you can articulate a value proposition, how many prospecting calls you make. These are all things that we use to optimize ourselves, and that's what's going to make us better, not better than other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned self-awareness has been one of the 5 points. Now, let's just start with this. You've trained a lot of salespeople. How self-aware are salespeople in general?
I don't think a lot of people are self-aware. I think we like to be. One of the most simple exercise to do it is record yourself in a meeting. You can start internally. You can ask the question, obviously, make sure people are aware. We have so many blind spots in terms of our human behavior. You can only get that objective perspective from someone else. Now, I always talk about how I liken it to listening to your own voice. Now, whenever we hear our own voice, we're like, oh my goodness, it's so high pitched. We forget that we hear our voice through bone, right? It's why it's got more bass to it. So that's a real simple way to understand how valuable and how different our perspective of ourselves can be from others. I highly recommend anyone to record video meetings. You'll start to understand when you study yourself, that if you're not actively listening, your customer will want to take the conversation one way and you're trying to divert it the other, or you're speaking over someone, or you say or you fiddle. There you go. I'm more aware of it even just talking about it.
Yeah.
It's really important to get that, and that 1% better every day across 20 different items is 20% better every day, and that's really important. And once you have the awareness, you can regulate. Okay, I know I'm not asking the right questions. I know I'm cutting my customer off. I I know that I'm unable to answer certain stats, that always seem to come up. It's a really, really valuable tool, and it's something that I don't see practiced at all. And it seems like such an obvious, simple fix. And I think we're a little scared of that mirror, but that mirror is our best opportunity to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I totally understand why people don't do it. I mean, I, do these webinars and I still dislike watching myself back. So I totally get it. And I probably should watch them back so I could be better at this. So that's a very good tip. What about one of the things I always think about? So when you're a salesperson, everybody sells slightly differently, right? So we all have, I should say all good salespeople sell slightly differently. They bring a little bit of themselves to the party, in effect.
Absolutely.
And it's in my experience, it's very hard to copy the way someone else sells. You've got to sell your own way. So how do you sort of balance that? So you're trying to think about, okay, I'm motivated, I'm planned, I've got questions, I'm trying to be self-aware about my behavior. And not sort of lose some of that nice stuff that's you, right? How do you balance that?
Yeah. Look, you're absolutely right. Authenticity is key, but I don't believe having empathy, communicating well, have self-awareness detracts from you being your authentic self at all. I think if anything, it helps you understand who that is and being able to leverage that. People buy from people first, and that's why EQ is so important, because this is a study in social science. Essentially, it's a relationship, and what people value in relationships is the same, be it in personal or in business. So being authentic is really important. What happens when you start to be aware of things and be able to make things better or be able to communicate clearer, it teaches you that you don't have to follow a script, right? Because you understand the techniques of clear communication and you can apply it on the fly. It becomes a thinking tool. I see a lot of businesses hand scripts out, and it's just, you can tell it's been copy and pasted. You can hear it in the phone. No one wants to buy from a robot. LinkedIn profiles on a personal level get such a higher engagement than company, because again, same with influencers versus brands in a social media space. People want to deal with people. They want to have someone who's okay with being human, because they're human as well. It doesn't make me feel bad that you're this perfect shiny robot. It's I want to deal with someone who understands my challenges and vulnerability, and that's what sales is. It's uncovering challenges, which is a vulnerable space, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hearing really what we're saying here, what we're talking about is optimizing, not changing who you are. So basically taking the humanity, the person that you are, and just saying, look, try and be a little bit better. There's these
Absolutely.
you take on. So self-regulation was the fifth one. And I'm really actually interested in this one to understand your thinking around this and why, and how does that get into EQ? Because the rest make absolute perfect sense to me. But yeah, where does self-regulation fit in?
Once you have self-awareness, you can regulate. So for example, motivation, once you understand that motivation is internal, you're aware of that, now you regulate, now you optimize. Okay, I know it's internal. So from now on, instead of having those things that I'm not really excited about on my to-do list, waiting for motivation to take hold, I'm going to plan them and I'm going to set a timer and I'm just going to do it and I'm going to let the momentum take in. That's what regulation is. It's understanding and then applying in order to maximize it. Empathy, knowing that if you're going into a meeting with nothing but points to talk about and no questions to ask, time to regulate. Be aware of that. Take stock of how you enter meetings, take stock of how you communicate, present. That's why that self-awareness piece is basically the platform and the foundation for you to add some spit and polish to everything to get better at it.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So once you become self-aware, it's a self-regulation that you're going to use to review how you're going and ideally adjust and optimize. So that makes...
Absolutely. And not only for yourself, for your buyers. A great simple example is speaking the language of your buyer. So if you work with different verticals, the communication you're going to have in, media is going to differ vastly from construction, right? So being understand that, again, coming back to the E, what matters to my buyer, not me. They shouldn't have to change their thinking to understand me. I have to change my language, my tone. If you're working with the government, it's a very, very different communication style than it would be working with an advertising agency. That's another way to self-regulate, really being aware of what's relevant and meaningful in different verticals and different spaces to different individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're a salesperson and you're about to go into see a customer in a new industry and you don't know too much about their industry, and so you think you're a little bit concerned that you won't be able to speak their language, how would you go about that? How would you think, okay, I've got only a couple of days to plan. I've got a whole new industry. It's a great opportunity, so it's absolutely worth going for. But I want to make sure I'm prepared and I can talk their lingo. How would you do that?
Absolutely. Well, first, there's not a business on this earth that doesn't have a web page. You know what I mean? If it does, I would question whether or not it's the right target for anybody is a salesperson. So there's always something to start there. And that is basic. And if you don't understand, they should be your first questions. Who is your buyer? What is your value proposition? What is, do you bill on, is revenue your target? Start to ask questions to understand those foundations before you start pitching yourself. Because again, their immediate reaction is, this isn't relevant. People are okay with people who are trying to understand them and trying to learn if they have their best interests at heart.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so just basics. It's as simple as doing basic homework, looking at their website, whatever you can read up on, and just getting some things to take away and come into the meeting.
Absolutely. Lead by asking. Just say, hey, I've never worked in this vertical before. I'm confident I can add a lot of value, but I want to seek to understand as much as I can in order to tailor something specifically for you. It's different than being like, here's something off the shelf, which quite frankly, I don't know if it fits because I really don't know enough about you. And that's what we say. That's the underlying message when we're not prepared to ask questions. Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, I'm just giving this a crack. Let's see if it works.
Yeah,
it's not as strong.
Yeah, good feedback. That's really helpful. And so let's move on to overcoming objections. I know this is something that you've got quite an interest in, and something that I personally have a massive interest in. I mean, to me, I love nothing more than an objection in a sale, because it means to me, I feel like I'm on the right track, right? And if I go to a meeting or I pitch someone and there's no objections, there's nothing worse.
No engagement, right?
Right, 100%. Completely flat and no idea how you're going. Whereas to me, an objection, it's perfect. It's the opportunity to overcome it, right? Like it's almost, in my mind, what sales is all about, right? Because you're trying to get to an objection, because if you don't get to an objection, you can't get to a close, typically.
I love that. I was always taught that an objection is just a request for more information. Now, I come back to language here because, again, language is really important. And I think we take it for granted. We forget that certain words mean things, and just because they've become colloquial, we've kind of washed that out. I think I've mentioned to you before that I studied improv, and the principal rule of improv is the yes and rule. Now, improv is not about comedy. It's about being to accept cues and hit barriers in conversation, be able to overcome them, and continue momentum of conversation. And really that's all sales is, because if you get an objection and you stall, where do you go from there, right? It's a skill set to be able to overcome that and move forward. So the first thing is to apply the yes and rule. What we do is when we hear an objection, we go, but that's not right, or but we can overcome that. Now, the word but actually signals that you're wrong. I disagree with you. Now, what happens when you disagree with a potential customer, Matt? What do they feel?
Not good. Yeah.
It's not good. You're saying you're wrong. We don't want that. Agreement is a building block of rapport. So the yes and rule teaches you hit an objective. Okay. Yes, I understand. I agree with you. And allows you to go and ask a question off it. So it's too expensive. Yes, I understand we're not the cheapest in market. And is price the only value that you look for in a partner? That helps you hit a barrier without saying, I'm going to stall you and I'm going to stop you because I disagree with you, because we don't want to disagree with the buyer. We want to agree with them. And the and allows you to move that conversation forward. And because we haven't stored that conversation with a but, they're more likely to respond to your question.
Okay, so yes and is your absolute first thing. Someone throws an objection to you, try and focus on yes and hide the buts. No buts, don't make it
no
negative.
Buts about it.
Excellent. And where from there? So, one of the things I see is particularly newer salespeople. They get an objection, and suddenly they're, you sort of see it, they're looking around, they're a little bit frozen, they're thinking, oh crap, I don't actually know the answer.
Yeah.
Right. How do you coach people who get hit with those ones? Because we can't always know the answer to everything. How do you help people, I suppose, answer, get to a yes and, but also make the customer feel good about asking the question?
And the yes and does it as well. Yes, and I can understand your concerns there. Let me go back and seek some more information for you. What you're doing, you're serving that objective as opposed to stalling it. I come back to preparation and planning. I'll always use Abraham Lincoln's quote that if I had 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 5 sharpening my axe. Sit there and map out what are potential barriers that I might come across in this conversation. Conversation is seen as something that's just on the fly, and it doesn't have to be. You can prepare to take a conversation anywhere. But it takes some thought out. What are the things that might come up? What do I know about this buyer, about their experience, about their competitors, who they're using, about their spend, anything that might help you pre-map objections. And you might not get them all, to your point. There's always going to be a curly one, but you'll get 80%. And the rest is you're able to come back to. As long as you don't stall it and say, I'm gonna let you finish, but you're wrong, you'll be able to continue that forward. And people are okay with you not knowing. I'd rather you say, look, I don't have the answer, than try to flub your way through it, because credibility is everything in sales, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you just, nearly every answer sort of comes back to this idea of preparation, do your homework,
Always.
Be ready, be organized. And that, I think, leads on to how organized should I be? I loved your 70% rule earlier about, being outbound prospecting and just getting out there and doing things. You're planning for meetings. How do you know whether you're doing enough or too little? And I mean, it's probably obvious, if you're practicing self-awareness and self-regulation, it's probably obvious if it's too little, right?
Yeah.
But what's too much? How do you know? Because I think you could spend all your time preparing and not enough time actually doing enough meetings.
Look, I would simplify it right down and make sure every meeting, every call, every conversation, you have a very clear objective. What am I seeking out of this interaction? And then 2, how will I know if I've got there or not? What that allows you to do, 1, allows you to have a meeting which actually has you reach a conclusion. I see so many meetings that everyone's like, okay, bye. So what was the purpose of that? Oh, it was just a meet and greet. But for what purpose? That's something that I think we need to get better at. Yeah. Having a clear understanding of what you want out of an interaction, as well as a clear understanding of whether or not you get it. So it could be key information. I'm not going to finish this call unless I have an understanding of their buying cycle, right? One example. That way you have a clear indication of whether you've done too much or too little, because you have a benchmark to work to.
Yeah, good. And I suppose one of the things that I always used to think about was I loved putting the dollar value of a deal or a prospective deal against every interaction, if it was, say, my whole month's quota, I could spend quite a bit of time preparing for things. If it was a very small deal, well, I would just do some basic preparation and keep moving. So just having some method, I suppose, to quantify it, I always felt useful, but I think maybe I just like to have rules to follow so I can be repeatable.
No, I think it's absolutely, and anything you can scale, right? Create a process. You don't have to manage yourself as a person. The 80-20 rule is another great example. Understand what's the 20% of your actions that delivers the 80% of the outcome. And if something's taking your time, that's the 80% that only delivers the 20. Again, self-awareness, self-regulation. Is this action going to actually drive outcome, or am I just driving output? Is it the best use of my time? And we can say no. I think we forget in salesperson that we can say no. We don't have to do everything that's asked for us. This is a two-way street.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And saying no is a great point, right? And I think a lot of salespeople are afraid to say no. They think their job is to say yes and almost to be, a friend or well-liked rather than respected. Yeah. So I think, being able to say no is incredibly important. Now, we've talked a little bit about language as we sort of talked through EQ and overcoming objections. And, I love the way you can use language to get outcomes. And I'm going to try and throw some rhyming in next time I do a sales pitch. So thank you for that. Yeah. But is there anything else we can work in? I mean, obviously this is your area of specialty, but are there any other little of those just nice little tips and tricks that we can sort of work in just to make it either stick a little bit better in their brain, a bit easier to understand? How do we simplify? How do we communicate more clearly?
I'll give you one. I call it CVP. So this is when you're reaching out to someone, and the objective of CVP, it allows you to make a statement, highlight why that statement is important. So frame the value for them where they receive that message. And then P is a proof point. So you're able to overcome an immediate objective. objection up front. So claim, value, proof. This is what I'm going to tell you. I can help you elevate your sales team. Why? What's the value proposition? Your sales team is the best and the first interaction a potential buyer has with your customer. What's a proof point? The proof point is, in this industry, I can drive X amount increase in your sales productivity. Can I talk to you about more detail? Very clear, very simple, allows you, again, understand the claim, have a value proposition, make sure it's relevant to your buyer, not just yourself, and then be able to effectively communicate a proof point against that. So CVP, you can use it everywhere.
Yeah, awesome. And it sounds particularly aligned to that outbound prospecting we were talking about earlier in terms of motivation. You know, you're planning to do a whole bunch of calls. Do you have a CVP worked out? I love that, right?
Perfect.
Yeah. And is it, when you're selling a product, and let's say you're selling a product to a single industry, maybe the IT industry, do you need to have multiple CVPs, or would you have sort of a standard one that you'd trot out to most people?
Look, value is personal, because you might think that, you might see value from a company basis. The value to the buyer may be that it makes them look good. It might be that it takes off their extra workload so that they can get home to their kids. You really, again, think about what's valuable to the person I'm speaking to, because people are buying from individuals. It is good to have one as a value proposition for your own business, but I would always seek to tailor it, because if you get in the habit of having a very stock standard response, you've lost the ability to connect on a one-on-one basis, because it's not tailored, and people can smell that a mile off. For original outreach, it's quite good, but understand, how does this affect the person I'm selling? What's the one benefit from there? Because people who are decision makers, ultimately they want something for themselves out of a partnership. It's not just to benefit the business, it's to make them more efficient or save time or money. And once you can really talk to that, people go, oh my goodness, this person's going to help me, not just my business.
Yeah, great point. And so just for, I suppose, the salespeople out there, they're starting to think, okay, well, I've got to think about, well, what role is the person in? What challenges do they face? What is the value to them? And then maybe just tweaking it around there. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because again, it's going to allow you, if that value proposition is your foot in the door. And once you can understand that, if you can understand that it's going to save them money, great example for you to be able to prove that, right? As opposed to drive more customers or whatnot. That might be the one thing that matters to them. It's an emotion, value is an emotional driver. So it's very personal to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do people, when they're starting off, like they've just started a new sales role, they're thinking about all these things they're going to do to be a great salesperson, how they're going to do about that. But they might start an organization. And I think if you've been a salesperson for a while, you've experienced this, where you start and they don't sort of have any collateral. They don't have anything to share. Yeah. All the salespeople have been there for a long time. Everything's in their head. Yeah, if you're a new salesperson, how do you get to that sort of those basics so you can do, the value with the proof and that sort of thing? Any sort of ideas around that?
Your current customers, your lapsed customers are the greatest source of learning, right? If you can find just understanding how they talk about that value, because again, there may be a disparity between the value that you feel like you've offered and what really brought the value to them. They could be like, this is great because it's made me look like a superstar and it's taken a job off my plate. That's really powerful for you. So as a new salesperson, even if you're just doing outbound, get face-to-face. Again, make the buyer and your customer the hero of it. Hey, I want to understand your experience. What was it that's working really well? How does this add value to your job and to your life? You'll be surprised at how many people are really, really open to giving that information, because you've asked them, there's status in that. You're showing you care and you want to continue to understand. It's really, really powerful, and it's something we don't do. And if you can find the way that your current customers feel about your product, their value proposition, you can understand the language, you can knock off quite a few things in those calls, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that makes absolute perfect sense. So rather than even trying to look within the business to find out, what are the proof points, where's the value, go and talk to the customers. And I think such a great lesson. Again, we're talking about that motivation, just getting out and doing it. As soon as you get in front of customers, if you have a good conversation, you'll probably find other opportunity. I mean, it often happens.
Absolutely.
So absolutely love that one. I think that's brilliant. Love it. And a bit disappointed I hadn't thought of it earlier. So yeah, well done.
You're welcome. If nothing else.
Yeah, brilliant. All right. Well, that's been absolute pleasure talking to you today, LJ, about EQ and communication, and hopefully salespeople have taken something away from this. I mean, I have been a salesperson for over 25 years, but always things to learn and always things to remember. And to me, if I only take away one thing from here, for me, it's preparation, right?
Yeah.
That preparation. I feel like there's so much they could do in all those areas.
Yeah.
But from your side, if a salesperson was going to take away just that one thing, that real snappy thing to take away and embed in their brain, what would it be?
Intention. Do everything with intention. It will help you become more efficient with your time, because you can stop and ask yourself, what do I want out of this? It's going to allow you to be more powerful with how you speak, with how you target. And there's too much just doing stuff, being busy. Your job is to be productive in what you do, and that comes with having a really clear understanding of what's my intention. So be intentional would be my one takeout.
Yeah, great takeaway. And just because now I feel I need to ask another question. How do you, like, intention's great, and really to me, intention means being present, being very thoughtful about what you're doing and being focused. How do you maintain that? Because obviously as humans, we struggle to do that across a whole day. Sometimes we struggle to do it in a single meeting. We vague off halfway through. So any thoughts on how you maintain that?
It's kind of embedded with planning, right? Because you just give yourself a beat. Like, salespeople are, I've never met a salesperson who's like, I have great time management, I have a really great work-life balance. And that's because we're constantly treading water. Once you realize that you're in control, and that with a little bit of consideration, planning, and having a really clear intention of everything that you're doing, you'll start to see the benefits. And then honestly, that's the only proof point you need. We make so many excuses, and it's really up to reps themselves to do that. What do I want out of this? Is this the best use of my time? Is it going to help me with my quota? If the answer is no, I would second guess if it's really of use to you right now.
Yeah, awesome. And what a great way to finish. I love it. Yeah, absolutely. Be super focused. Think about your own time. Yeah. Be very careful.
You're sort of, it's only a barrier to you. No, it's no one else's time but your own. So it's up to you how you use it. So use it wisely.
Awesome. Now, I will just open up. I'm not sure whether we've got any questions. If anybody wants to throw anything into the chat or turn their camera on and ask a question, we do have 5 minutes for questions if anybody has any, although it was pretty expensive. So.
I actually do have some questions, or I've got a couple of things I'd like to know. Sorry, there's just an awful amount of background noise right now, so I do apologise.
All right.
The behavioural science stuff that you mentioned, obviously super fascinating for a lot of reasons. Just what would be some books or articles or blogs or podcasts, anything that you've sort of uncovered that was absolute sort of gold, because there's so much here to unpack. Yeah.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, anything by Malcolm Gladwell, Talking with Strangers, Outliers. He serves as my inspiration. So hugely fascinated work. Books. Debbie from Marketing Has Left for the Day is a great one on terms of behavioral design. So behavioral design is how to take behavioral science and apply it in application. So that's probably the biggest ones that have served me really, really well. Also psychology. I think it's called I can't remember what it's called, but it's called Influence, the psychology behind persuasion. Another really great example that teaches you things that marketing teach you and sales doesn't. I was a marketer long before I was a salesperson, and marketing tells you price framing, right? It tells you message anchoring. It teaches you storytelling. Advertising taught me performative pitching and stickiness of messages. Sales taught me it's a numbers game, and I disagree with that wholeheartedly, which is why I'm coming always back to intention, because it's not a spray and pray approach anymore. But they're the key ones that I would study.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Brad. Any other questions? Anyone else got any thing they want to ask of LJ? No, it looks fairly quiet. You answered all the questions too well, LJ. That's why. They're probably all still.
I've added some value.
Oh, look, absolutely. And I think, any salesperson that watches this should get immense value out of it. And if they don't, they're probably not paying enough attention. So, yeah, awesome. So thank you very much for your time. We've really appreciated having you on as a guest. And yeah, thank you. And
Awesome.
goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye.